Welcome to the UN and Organised Crime, a podcast from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. I'm Ian Tennant. This episode takes place as UN member states have embarked on the preparatory process for the 15th UN Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, which will take place in Abu Dhabi in April 2026. The Crime Congress is the biggest gathering of officials, experts and organisations focused on crime and justice issues, and it takes place every 5 years, in theory. However, the last Congress took place in Kyoto in 2021 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, meaning it took place 1 year later than it should have, and also with tight restrictions on who could attend in person. That means that the next Congress will be the first opportunity to get together in person at its intended scale for 11 years, since the 2015 Congress in Doha. The Crime Congress has a long history that were born out of a series of conferences that predate the United Nations itself, and they have a unique role for independent experts and civil society organizations. The Congress is mandated to act as a platform for exchange between different sectors. It's not just another intergovernmental meeting. Despite this, it remains a challenge to ensure meaningful participation for civil society in the Congress. As I mentioned, the last Congress took place largely online in Kyoto. And since the 1990s, the Congress has moved closer into the orbit of the UN Crime Commission, which is, of course, an intergovernmental process. And this all takes place amongst the broader trend of restrictions of civil society at the national level and in the UN system, and in a more fragmented geopolitical time in which we now live. So when a meeting takes place like this every 5 years, there's also a risk that corporate memory is lost, as the rotating group of diplomats in Vienna who deal with the Congress usually only attend one Congress in their posting. And when the issue of civil society engagement, for example, is not understood well from a historical perspective, there are risks that the Congress loses touch with its roots and its place in the UN system as a platform for the exchange of ideas, perspectives and experiences. Luckily, there's a handful of people who have been present and involved in many crime congresses over the years. And the UN and Organised Crime podcast is today lucky to have the opportunity to speak to Dr Matti Joutsen, author of the most comprehensive history of the UN crime programme, which was published by Routledge in June 2024. Dr Joutsen served as a criminologist at the Ministry of Justice in Finland, court clerk and lower court judge, director of international affairs at the Ministry of Justice, and therefore a very senior Finnish delegate at crime congresses. He's a former director of HEUNI, the European Institute of Crime Prevention and Control, and a special advisor at the Thailand Institute of Justice in Bangkok. And for the UN, he has served as an interregional advisor for the UN crime programme. In 2021, in recognition of his contribution to Japanese-European cooperation on crime prevention and criminal justice, he was honoured with the Order of the Rising Sun, gold rays with rosette, granted by His Imperial Highness the Emperor of Japan. Matti, welcome to the podcast today and congratulations on the publication of your book, which I have a copy of in front of me. In fact, in the book you devote a specific chapter to the role of civil society in the development and implementation of the UN crime programme, and a specific chapter to the UN Crime Congress. So my first question to you is, how many congresses have you attended yourself? And through those experiences and through the research that you've done, how central has what we now refer to as civil society been in the history and practice of the Congress?
Congresses have been organized since 1955. At that time, I was 3 years old, so I didn't quite make that Congress. I've been attending them since 1975, which was the 5th Congress held in Geneva. I missed the next one in Caracas, but after that, I have attended all of them, which would make a total of, I believe, 9 Congresses. I was a general rapporteur in Vienna in 2000 and one of the chairpersons at each of the subsequent 3 Congresses. Civil society has been pretty much involved from the outset. The Congresses have basically brought in all stakeholders, NGOs, civil society in general, from the outset. And the reason for that is that they build on a tradition that was started way back in 1872 when an academic and professional congress was held in Germany. At that Congress and after that Congress, it was decided that this was such a good thing, these congresses would be repeated every 5 years. And the International Penal and Penitentiary Commission was set up to prepare these, run these, and then take care of the follow-up. After the Second World War, when the UN was set up, it was decided pretty soon afterwards that the UN should also get involved in crime prevention and criminal justice, or as it was known at that time, the prevention of crime and the treatment of offenders. And the UN did this very simply. They basically took over the International Penal and Penitentiary Commission work, including the organization of the the congresses every 5 years. And since that time, since the first UN Congress in 1955, the UN has run these. Because of that past history, the involvement of the academic and professional community, civil society has been involved, and indeed, pretty much all of the stakeholders have been represented.
Matti, you've explained the congresses are very old. They have a very specific relationship with independent experts, but the format and the processes have changed over the years, and most notably since the creation of the UN Crime Commission, the CCPCJ, in the 1990s. Can you say something about how this impacted the Congress and how things have changed in your view since then, either both for better and for worse?
The congresses themselves have constantly evolved. Basically, if a participant at the first congresses held back in 1955, 60, 65, if you could put them into a time capsule and bring them to the Kyoto Congress, which was held in 2021, they would find a lot of things that were pretty much the same, where you had the different stakeholders debating key topics in crime prevention and criminal justice. Now, one of the bigger changes over those 70 years has been the people participating. Back in the first congresses, they were male practitioners and academics basically from the developed Western countries predominantly. And what they were trying to do was determine what is the cause of crime. That's that traditional old classical criminological question, and how best to treat the offenders who are guilty of ordinary crime. And treating them meant basically putting them in a correctional institution. What has changed since those early days was that more and more countries began to become involved in the work of the United Nations, and they also became participants to the Congress. So the Congresses have grown considerably, become more global. At the same time, also, the key crime and criminal justice issues have changed considerably. These, I would say, are the main ones. Change in content, the change brought about by the Congress declarations, and I would say now a greater balance between participation of national delegations, non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, and others. I would also, by the way, add, and many of the other podcasts that you have run have identified this, many of the topics have become more politicized. And there have been examples of that in the more recent congresses. For example, in Bahia de Salvador in 2010 on cybercrime, which already then was very sensitive. But I would say that given that the national delegations, the member states, now are pretty much the masters of the UN crime program and its direction, there is still a very good discussion that can be very non-politicized.
From my perspective, I think the declarations, as you say, have become more politicized, but they also, when you look back at them, they provide quite a useful barometer of where the direction of travel is going. So when you look at the history of the UN TOC, Transnational Organized Crime Convention, you can see how it may be referred to, the idea of a new legal instrument is referred to in Congress outcome documents, and how that changes over the years. The same for cybercrime, as you mentioned, in Salvador. And we now indeed have a cybercrime convention, which can draw its origins back to that Congress. So my next question to you is, I mean, you've spoken about how the standards and norms and the resolutions have kind of moved out of the Congress's work and into the CCPCJ's work. So is the Congress merely then a consultative body, or do you still see it having real normative impact on the work of the UN crime program?
I would definitely say it still has an impact on the UN crime program. It's not normative in the sense that Congress decisions, which would basically be the Congress declaration, would determine the UN crime program. The General Assembly resolution that is now the one that establishes the parameters, the functions of the UN Congresses. General Assembly Resolution 56/119, if anyone's taking notes, from 2002, I believe. It specifically says that the Congress is a consultative body to the UN crime program. The Commission can frame questions that it would then put to the Congress, asking for the opinion. The Congress itself cannot tell the UN Crime Commission, you do this. Even though the Congresses don't have a normative function, it's only a consultative function, they do have that considerable impact on the UN crime program. And I would say they have an impact in another very important way. They identify emerging themes. They identify what seems to be good policy. Now, this can be done and is being done by the Crime Commission at its annual meetings, but it's not done in the same very well prepared way in which you would have specific topics that are very carefully prepared, first of all, by the Secretariat with their excellent background documents. Then you would have the different delegations, be they national delegations, NGO, IGO, United Nations, program institutes, and individual experts who would be preparing their own contributions. And these congresses, when I look back at those 9 congresses that I have attended, you could see them as not only a reflection of what is the prevailing understanding of crime and criminal justice, but as a channel for globalizing what appear to be good practice in individual countries. You cannot simply take the practice from one country and then spread it, which was the earlier Western assumption of how good policy, good practice is diffused. But you can have a discussion. Well, you have this very interesting example of restorative justice from Australia. How can we adapt that to, say, Canadian First Peoples or to Brazilian context? And you get this wide discussion.
When we've spoken before, you've mentioned to me the Havana Congress as being particularly interesting. And to me, it seems like a very interesting moment, 1990, the way things were changing. What was it like? And can you give us a sense of what it was like to be there in Havana in 1990?
Like you said, it was intensive, but it was also enjoyable. I have, in fact, enjoyed all of the congresses in different ways. The first Congress I attended in Geneva in 1975. I still remember the wonderful events at the Milano Fiori, where the 1985 Congress was held in Milan. The wonderful hospitality of our Egyptian hosts in Cairo. Same thing in Vienna in 2000. Bangkok 2005, Bahia de Salvador, Doha, of course, and Kyoto, which was a very unique event. But the Havana Congress, at that time, before the restructuring, congresses were 2-week activities. You would work for 5 days, then you would have leisure time over the weekend to recharge, to connect with your colleagues. I remember spending the weekend with many good colleagues in 1990 at the beach in Varadero. So it's a way of releasing the pressure, but at the same time, getting into more intense discussions about what is happening. When the restructuring was debated, there was a fairly solid understanding that the Congresses would continue. I must say that there was one country that was rather doubtful about the value of the Congresses and had suggested that, come on, since we'll be meeting in Vienna every year for the UN Crime Commission, why would we need congresses every 5 years? They're basically big diplomatic events with cocktail parties and whatnot. They really don't make that much of a difference. But that remained very much a minority view. And as part of the restructuring, the role of the congresses being held every 5 years was enshrined in the General Assembly resolution. But there has been since then pressure to get more bang for your buck, get a more effective Congress. There were attempts, for example, to have more tightly defined topics, less preparation, in other words, less paperwork by the Secretariat, shorter documents, more intense workshops. Luckily, when we went to Bangkok in 2005, then Bahia de Salvador in 2010, the congresses were a bit longer. Same thing in Doha. In 2021, unfortunately, because of the coronavirus epidemic, it was decided to shorten the Kyoto Congress by a few days. So it was actually only a 6-day Congress. We are now once again with the Abu Dhabi Congress at the end of April 2026 in a new situation with a severe budgetary difficulty. And as a result of that, instead of having this longer Congress that many of us would like, because that would give us more time to discuss the individual topics, the workshops, have those ancillary meetings, it will again only be a 6-day Congress.
Yes, and I think the budgetary issues are not getting any easier for the UN in general. And let's hope that the Congress can have as much time as possible in 2026. I wanted to ask you, given everything you've said, if you had one message, because now the diplomats in Vienna are starting to get their heads around this Congress that's happening next year. They've had a couple of regional preparatory meetings already, one in Bangkok, one in San Jose, Costa Rica. There's one in Vienna coming up in March, followed by Addis Ababa and another one for Western Asia as well. So, what would your top message or top priorities be for those diplomats? What do you think they should be focusing on? Whether it's the declaration, side events, generally engaging. What's your main recommendation?
No matter if you're a diplomat on your national delegation or you're one of the experts from the capitals, to use the UN jargon, who will be packing your bags for Abu Dhabi in April 2026. See you there. Start thinking about what are good policies, good practices that you can bring to Abu Dhabi to present to your colleagues, because they are facing the exact same, well, perhaps with some refinements, more or less the same crime problems that you have, criminal justice problems that you have, issues of resources, issues of efficiency. How do you apply artificial intelligence to police work, to the work of the courts, of corrections? How do you deal with these various evolving issues that your country is facing? What are you doing that would be of interest to your colleagues elsewhere? And at the same time, keep an open mind when you decide on what you will be doing in Abu Dhabi. Yes, you should attend the discussion on those 4 fairly broad topics, because there will be good points made. But don't forget also these workshops that are being prepared by the Program Network Institutes, together with other Program Network Institutes, interested member states, and of course the UN ODC. Because in those, you should get some more hands-on discussion about what are the promising practices, what are policies that have been shown to work in different countries. And I hope you don't mind, Ian, if I mention that I'm involved together with the team from the Thailand Institute of Justice in the preparations for Workshop 3, which I would certainly think would be of interest not only to policymakers and practitioners, because the idea is, how do you get the data, the evidence that a policy or a practice works? How do you collect this data? How do you get the statistics that shows you how crime is evolving, how the response of the criminal justice practitioners are evolving, and how does the academic community, the researchers, and the practitioners convey this information to the policymakers so that this could be used in the improvement of policy? And more in general, and I hope that some people don't regard this as something really silly, congresses are absolutely great places for networking, because you will be meeting colleagues, academics, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, people from civil society who have interesting things to tell you, and they in turn might benefit from your own experience or what information that your country has to provide. So congresses are a great place to exchange ideas that you can bring back home when you pack your souvenirs and that small pile of documents, which now, of course, is in a digitalized format. So it's perhaps enough that you just have that memory stick together with those great ideas that you'll be picking up.
Thanks, Matti. And I'm sure that the advice that you've given will be listened to by the diplomats as they're preparing for the next Congress. And I'm sure lots of experts from civil society will be listening with interest as well. Well, thank you so much, Matti, for your time, for joining us today. And congratulations again on the publication of your book, The United Nations Programme on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. From the Global Initiative's perspective, Matti, as you say, see you there in Abu Dhabi in 2026. We look forward to it. We will be doing all that we can to promote the issues that we see as priorities on transnational organised crime. And one of the things about the crime congress is that they happen every 5 years. Things change a lot in those 5 years. So in the last 5 years, we've seen organised crime change and evolve quite dramatically, actually, when you look at what happened during the COVID pandemic. When you look at the range of environmental harms, the way that illicit finance continues to grow and be facilitated, including by the use of hubs of illicit flows of various kinds around the world. So we hope that we can really promote a more realistic and up-to-date understanding of what transnational organised crime looks like at the moment. And we hope to, as you said, Matti, promote data and new evidence as part of enhancing responses, and also to make sure that civil society is welcomed and supported in its role as a partner in responding to organised crime more effectively, including through the deliberations at the Crime Congress. So you've been listening to the UN and Organised Crime. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you again for your time, Dr. Joutsen.